Hey, welcome. You're listening to the Coach's Locker podcast with Chris Fore. Really appreciate you being here. We are looking at episode 27. Episode 27 here of the Coach's Locker podcast. And I really appreciate you, my audience. I had some really great feedback last week on our podcast about being fired in a Sears parking lot. And in our story about Coach John Kane. Coach, thanks again for joining us. And then I shared my story myself of being fired on a Friday afternoon right before family vacation. There's no better time to be fired or let go or asked to resign or whatever you want to call it. Friday right before vacation. I'm telling you, that just made me real chipper for that whole week. I had a great time with my kids, no stress at all. Joking. Hey, today we're going to talk about Sham interviews, and then at the end, if we have a chance, I'm going to hit on some questions I asked in a interview I had about a year ago for an administrative athletic director position here in SoCal. We'll see how this goes, but what I'm going to hit on today, again, we're going to talk about being in a sham interview. That's what I call it. You know, those fake interviews, you know what I mean? When they're not really an interview, but you've just wasted your entire day. You took a day off, went to go interview for a job, and it really wasn't an interview. We're going to be talking about that today, how you know if you've been in a sham interview. You are listening to the Coach's Locker podcast with Chris Fore, a place for all coaches to call home. The Coach's Locker podcast is a part of the Football Coaching Podcast Network. Please visit footballcoachingpodcast.com to hear and see our entire lineup of top football coaches coming to you every single podcast with valuable information to help you and your program. The Coach's Locker podcast with Chris Fore exists to help prepare coaches to be hired for the job of their dreams and to provide coaches with dynamite resources to become even more successful in their field. You can reach me on Twitter at Coach Fore, that's at COACHFORE, and my podcast home is at 8laces.org/podcast. That's 8laces, EIGHTLACES.org/podcast. Welcome to the Coach's Locker podcast with Chris Fore. Now, let's get after it. Hands up, forget about the past, 'cause you and I's everything I ever asked for. Top down round the West Coast. So this chapter is a chapter in my book. I wrote a book called An Insider's Guide to Scoring Your Next Coaching Job. Okay, you can get that as a paperback, hard copy, or a PDF at my website, 8laces.org, EIGHTLACES.org, 8laces.org. You can get that book. Listen, let me look up something here. I'm going to see how much it's selling for right now. It's not a lot of money. 8laces.org. So I'm going to give you a coupon. So sorry I didn't organize this. Let's see. 8laces.org and then go to shop. Okay. And if you get the PDF version, it comes to you right in your email. Okay. I'm selling it for $19.94 right now. $19. It's a PDF. People tell me sometimes like, oh man, that's a lot of money for this book as a PDF. And my response back to them is, then go find another book that an athletic director has written to high school coaches about the same thing. It's one of those kind of supply and demand things. There's not a lot of athletic directors who have written books like this, and so that's why I charge what I charge for it. So it hits this, 14 chapters. Again, check it out, 8laces.org, $19. And I'm going to give you a coupon code right now if you want to go buy this book. This coupon code will be good just during the year 2019. You can save, let's give you a $10 discount, okay? So use the coupon code podcast, save $10. I'll sell that to you for $9.94, okay? The coupon code podcast for $10, okay? $10 coupon. Buy it for $9.94. So anyway, there we go. So this is one of those chapters I wrote. So one of the most popular series of questions I get, because I talk with a lot of coaches at the high school level and then some at the college level about interviewing and what have you. When I get about, hey, following up with an AD or what should I send to an AD, that's one of the most popular questions I get via email, Twitter, text, what have you, okay? The tagline for my business, preparing coaches to be hired for the job of their dreams and providing coaches and athletic directors with dynamite resources to become even more successful. And I take a lot of joy in helping you guys find your new jobs. You guys, get those interviews, hopefully. I became, as I talked about last week, unemployed for the first time in my life in July 2011, 35 years old, married, 3 kids, well, 2, 1 on the way. And it was a real brutal time. So, but I was looking for a job really for the first time ever in my life, really looking for a job. 35 years old. Before that, I'd always basically had one or been asked to apply or what have you. And so, this was brand new territory for me, finding a job in coaching, in athletic director world, athletic directing. Okay, I was experienced in hiring coaches. I was experienced in firing a couple coaches, but not finding my job myself in this world, really. I never really set out to do that, and so I wasn't able to find a ton of advice about the coaching world, a coaching resume, a coaching cover letter, and or how to position yourself for a great AD job. There just wasn't a whole lot out there, and so that's kind of how I got into this world. So I was offered a job just a few weeks after I was released, and it was at another private school as their athletic director. Like 2 weeks later, I was offered a job. But unfortunately, the finances were awful. They were horrible. It was basically, my pay was cut just right in half. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It was actually worse than that when you figured in the healthcare. And so it went from, 85 to 42, I think was what it was. This offered another school here in Southern California. And I was like, that's not going to work. So, and it was one of those things, it was real tough because I didn't have a job. Okay. And so, but I'm like, well, 2 weeks into it, my new job search here, I'm going to have to pass on that. I mean, it was literally impossible for our family to do. So, it was kind of late in the hiring process. I was out of work and education for about 9 months total. So I ended up doing what any unemployed football coach would do. I covered a lot of games for a local newspaper. I had a lot of offers from friends or what have you to go walk on, but I kind of wanted to get away from it. I was really burned. And so I got a job driving a taxi part-time, which was, holy smokes, man, it was tremendous. I kind of joke with my wife every now and then. Now, well, I'll tell you that first, but sometimes I joke with my wife. I'm like, if a piano ever falls out of the sky and kills you and the kids, I might just move to Oceanside and drive a taxi. Because it was a lot of fun. Now, this was before Uber. This was back in 2011. No ride-sharing organizations out there. But, man, I had fun on some of those nights, Just meeting people from all over the world, literally all over the world. This was down in San Diego County, North San Diego County, Oceanside, Carlsbad, La Costa, that whole area. And just really interesting line of work, man. You go pick up some Japanese businessmen in La Costa at the Omni Resort, who were there for golf, and these guys, you could tell, are just worth millions and millions of dollars, and they're going to a steakhouse in San Diego, and they're in suits, and then the very next call you get, you're picking up a homeless guy who, you're loading up your trunk with everything he owns because he just got kicked out of some campground or something. I don't know. It was just, there were a lot of fun nights there. But, man, I'll tell you what, there were a lot of nights I made $45 for 12 hours worth of work. That was brutal. I worked a shift from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. That was my shift in that taxi. So anyway, I kept track of my jobs. I applied to 176 jobs in 9 months. 176 jobs. Let that sink in for a minute. That's 19 job applications per month. I mean, my wife and I kind of joked at the fact that my job was finding a job. That's what it was. And I also wrote a book and started a website. So that's cool. I wrote Building Championship Caliber Football Programs, where I surveyed 106 coaches from 42 states about kind of their methodology and top 10 characteristics of their championship football program. So I did all that stuff, kind of when I was looking for a job. I applied for jobs from being, a superintendent at a private Christian school in Santa Barbara, where I was a finalist of 3, because I'd been in Christian education for 10 years and then 6 years before that in youth ministry. So I had 16 years under my belt in Christian ministry. That was a really fun gig. That was I got real close to that, but at the end of the day, just didn't have the educational background they were looking for in a superintendent position. But obviously applied to a bunch of head football coach jobs. I applied to a job as a gas station manager because it was right down the road from me. I was in panic mode, I was in panic mode, and I was just looking for anything to provide for my family once the school year started. I knew I was not going to be hired by, that started that school year August. And so from basically July of 2011 to March of 2012, I had 8 interviews at schools where I really wanted to work. One was for a chaplain job out in Texas, Houston Christian. 3 different athletic director jobs here in Southern California. 4 head football coach jobs in Southern California. The timing was awful. July, August was way late to be in the hiring process. January, March was pretty early. So they were all pretty unique situations, to be honest. Out of those 7 interviews, I was offered 3 of the jobs. So that wasn't, too bad of percentages, I guess. I think that's a, pretty decent percentage, 3 out of 7. 3 out of 7 jobs are offered to me in the world of high school athletics. And finally, I accepted one of those as an athletic director. And so I wanted to share all of that. That was kind of a long overhaul there to give you some perspective on why I write about all this stuff and talk about all this stuff in the world of the job search. I went through a lot. One of the things I realized when I got on Twitter and into this world of talking to coaches from all over the place is that, nobody was really talking about this job search stuff for coaches. And it was, most guys are just not doing this, some great program building stuff, some great offensive stuff and defensive stuff and line stuff. But this is what I just really focused on with a business that just kind of I fell into backwards, So anyway, I thought it was time for some writing on this topic of finding a job. And that's why I wrote this book, An Insider's Guide to Scoring Your Next Coaching Job. Here are some of the keys I learned through this process of both looking for a job and then also when I've hired folks for a job. I'm not sure how many parts, how many different coaches I've interviewed. That would be interesting to have kept track of, okay, over all this time. But here are some things I've learned, okay? Is this a real or a fake interview? And you know what I mean? Like some guys might be listening to this going, fake interview? What are you talking about? Yes, there are fake interviews. There are fake interviews all over the place. I remember one job, I'm not going to say the school, but it's a private school here in Southern California. The interview was like 13 minutes. And I'm like, these guys, these clowns wasted my entire day. I drove here 2 hours. I prepped like crazy, spent probably 3 days studying these guys, studying the community, called probably 25 people. And I walk in and it's 13-minute interview. Like, yeah, that was a freaking waste of my time. But 2 head football coach interviews I had were a complete waste of my time. Now I think about it. One of them I could tell as soon as I got to the school, they'd already made up their mind. I absolutely knew it. Walking in, talking to the very first person. In fact, I almost left right then and there because I was convinced the interview was just a process they were putting people through to tell their own people, they did a search and an interview. And a lot of people ask that question, hey, coach, I just had this interview, but man, I think it was ridiculous. I think they already have their guy. Why do schools do this? Well, some public schools, it's the law, or it's part of their contract with the district that they have to have interviews. So that's what it is in most public sectors, okay? The private sector, they don't necessarily have to interview 5 guys or something like that. Usually, I've worked at 2 private schools. A lot of times they don't have those kind of parameters, but it's good process, obviously. And so a lot of times they just have those interviews, for their own people, to tell their parents and players, faculty and staff, hey, we did a search, a nationwide search. They call it that a lot of times. The only reason you're calling it a nationwide search is because you got people to apply for your job from around the nation. That doesn't mean you did a nationwide search. See, there's a huge difference. You weren't searching nationwide. You were accepting nationwide. And so they want to tell their people they did a search and an interview, and we went through a whole process. They'll sometimes put together this whole panel or what have you. So, in fact, I've gotten to know one of the a guy on Twitter through one of those fake interviews, and we talked years ago. We kind of compared notes, and he felt the same way I did. Yep, it was a sham. So let's talk about a couple ways you can know you're in a fake interview, okay? The number of candidates, and the length of the interview. When I showed up to that interview I was just telling you about, I referred to above, a person asked me to find my name on a piece of paper. This lady actually handed me a piece of paper with all 10 candidates' names on it. Can you believe that? I think I was the first one. And so she hands me this paper. There's 10 names on there. And they were going to interview 10 of us for 30 minutes each that day. I felt this was a complete sham right then and there. And this was going to be the only interview. So what can you really figure out in a 30-minute interview for a head football coach position, right? They were just moving people in and out of there so they could say they did it. I'm convinced that's why it happened. And so I always tell guys this, and in fact, I got a message the other day on Twitter from a guy who said, Coach, dude, great piece of advice you gave me one time. And I said, yeah, I totally remember telling him this. Or he read it in one of my writings. But I tell guys all the time, when they're going to interview, a lot of times you got to sign in at the school, right? When you get in, you got to sign in at the front desk. When you do that, look at the other names of the guys who signed in, because you might be able to tell right away, you might be able to see who some of those guys are, some of those hitters, some of those dudes who have now, unless you're the first one there, obviously. If you're the first one there, that's not going to work, but a lot of times you'll be able to see, okay, hey, oh yeah, I recognize Chuck Smith. Yeah, I know Chuck. Yeah, wow, he applied. Hey, Dan Marino. Yeah, I know Danny Marino. Danny Marino, he's my boy. I didn't know he was applying for this job, and now he's interviewing, and I'm going against him. And so it's, a coach recently sent me a message and said, dude, I did that, and there's no way I'm getting the job, man. The quality of guys who interviewed before me, I'm not going to beat them. And so that was kind of interesting to hear that. But, yeah, this lady gives me – I always ask for the first interview. I think it's really good. Really, a client of mine just had an interview this past Thursday. And Friday. He had an interview Friday, and he asked me, hey, they just called me, and they're giving me a choice of 4 different interview spots. Should I be the first or the last? And my take on that is you always want to be first. That's my take. That's my opinion, my position on that question, because you want that panel or whoever it is, 2 people, 18 people, you want them comparing everybody to you. That's what's going to happen, okay? I've done interviews before. I've done a lot of interviews. I get that. I take a temperature with that first guy, okay? All right, I'm going to compare everybody to that first person. In fact, in some sectors out there in the public or private school world, where they use a matrix, and you have to rank the people. Before you even score them out or talk with anybody else, you rank those candidates. And so the first one in, you put a number 1 next to his name. So that's candidate number 1. Second, a lot of people don't know this is how it works if you've never interviewed anybody. The second person that comes in okay, they're a 2. They're a 2 automatically unless they beat out that 1. So let's keep it simple. Let's go A, B, C, D. Adam. Adam comes in, boom, he's candidate number 1 right away. And so that's what I'm saying, like, you want everybody to compare against you, the first guy. And I know this is a little tangent here, okay? But you want to be compared to all day. Now, folks, that's if you have confidence in yourself. If you believe in yourself, you go 1. If you believe in yourself, you go 1. You feel that? Okay? Don't just go 1 because old Coach Fore said so behind the mic. If you have confidence in yourself, you go 1. And you better have confidence or don't go interview, right? Unless maybe you're just going to learn something, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But on that score sheet, okay, Adam, boom, he's number 1. Bob comes in interview, the second guy. I don't think he beat out Adam. He's number 2, okay? And then Chris comes in, third guy, Chris. Chris knocks it out of the park. Of course he does. He's Chris. Chris knocks it out of the park, okay? Now I'm going to go Chris 1, Adam 2, okay, and Bob 3, because I just had 1, 2 for Adam, Bob. Now Chris came in. I'm going 3, 1, 2, okay, and then David comes in, and David was pretty good. He's actually a step below Chris, obviously. Okay, so now after that fourth guy in those 4 boxes, I'm going Chris 1, David 2, Adam 3, Bob 4. Okay, so that's why, and not everybody does that system, but a lot of schools, use something similar to it. That's why I think it's real important to go first. Okay, so when this lady handed me it was a sheet of stickers because I tore it off and put it on as my name tag. And when I saw 10 on there and I knew I was first, I'm like, yeah, these guys are just saying they're interviewing 10. They know who they want because there's 30-minute interview. That's not very long. And I didn't know. They never told me going in how long that interview was going to be. Sometimes they don't tell you. That's another side note. I tell guys all the time, find out as much as you can about that interview room and process. Is there 1 interview? Is there 2 interviews? Is there 3 interviews? What am I walking into here? Is this the first round or is this it? How many people are in the room? Okay. I want to know how many, and will they release the names to me? Okay, because I want to know that too. And then, so how many people in the room? Who's in the room? What position are those people? Start doing your research. Google that stuff. Figure out the research. And then also, how long is the interview? Okay, you want to know all that. And so, if they're doing 30-minute interviews and they're not saying this is a preliminary first-round interview, you're probably in a sham interview. Okay, you're probably in a sham interview. Find out what the interview process will be like. Many times, from my experience, if there's only 1 interview, they probably already know who they're going to hire. That's just what I'm going to say. If there's only 1 interview, not always, but I think most of the time, if it's 1 interview, they know who they're going to hire. When I was at Capistrano Valley Christian as an AD, I would bring in 3 to 4 guys interview for head jobs. Those interviews would be with me, the principal, and the superintendent. We would go into those interviews hoping to make a selection after 1 interview. Some schools do it like that. Most of the time, we found our guy after 1 interview, but that's because I did a ton of work on those top 3 to 4 candidates before interviews. I learned early in my career as an AD, do some fact checking, some reference checking beforehand. A lot of reasons for that. And there's just a lot of ADs who aren't very good. They don't do all that work, okay? But the key here is to try to figure out what the interview process will be like. Ask the AD, the Human Resources Office. Ask them some tough questions about this process. Press them a little bit. You might be able to tell if the interview process is really a sham or not before you even go. I've had an AD tell me, I'm sorry, we can't tell you, anything more about the interview. Okay, thank you, sir. And then I'll call HR. I'll just, hey, I understand you guys have football interviews going on next Thursday. It's some lady on there. She doesn't really care. They're just interviews to her. They're not big position. This ain't a big to-do. It's just an interview, right? Sometimes. And, yes, we are. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Do you know who's on that panel? Yeah, 1 second, please. Comes back. Hello, sir. we're going to have the principal, the athletic director, somebody from HR, and another head coach is going to be on that panel. It doesn't say here who the head coach is. All right, thank you. And how long do you think those interviews are going to be? Well, they're slotted for 45 minutes each. Oh, great. Thank you, ma'am. Notice I never gave my phone number. I never gave my name to that lady. Okay, I don't want her knowing per se. Because then she calls the AD and goes, oh, hey, Chris Fore just called here with some questions about the interview panel. I thought that was pretty smart of him. And he goes, yeah, I just told Chris Fore we can't release that information. So now you're on the hot seat before you started. Not a good place to be. But try to figure out what's going to happen in that room. Okay? So number one way to know you're heading into an interview is the number of candidates and the length of that interview. I guess I could go number one, number of candidates being interviewed. Number two, the length of the interview. Okay? Like I said, I had a 13-minute interview I had. Boy, that was a freaking joke. There was one guy who never even looked at me the whole time. Their panel of 5 people never even looked at me. And I understand sometimes they do this. They set these things up as like one guy to be the hard guy, the bad cop or whatever sometimes. But, that's kind of a joke, I think. But, one of those guys, he never looked up. He was just so busy on his BlackBerry back in those days. Number 2. Who is being interviewed? Try to find out who else is being interviewed. This will help you determine if your interview if it's just a sham. For instance, if they're interviewing 3 of you, one of them is already on their staff as a coordinator. He's been at the school for a dozen years. You might be walking into a sham interview. If you're able to find out that one of the finalists for an AD job at a school you're interviewing for is married to the most popular coach on campus, it's true, this happened to me, this true story, you might be walking into a sham interview. Again, if you're able to find out one of the finalists for an AD job at a school you're interviewing with is married to the most popular coach on campus, you might be walking into a sham interview. Network with anyone you might know at that school. Network with anyone you might know in the league. Network with anyone you might know in that part of the state. You never know what you might hear just by asking around about that job. You might learn they already have someone in mind or that it's a wide open job. You never know. Do what you can to find out who else is being interviewed. Okay, this will help you as you prepare an interview. I had a client who interviewed, I think it was 2 years ago. He asked me, for a little help. Hey, can you try to find out who else is interviewing for this job? There's one guy, if he gets it, if he gets the interview, it's his. I know that 100% guaranteed I won't have a chance. And so, we were able to find out that, that guy was going in for an interview. And sure enough, my client backed out, didn't want to even waste a day off of work to go. And sure enough, that guy got hired. So do what you can. This will help you prepare and interview. Going back to a blog I've written about a list that lady handed me, I was second on that list, so I found my name very fast. But that list of 10 stickers, I had the opportunity to see who my competition was, so I took a look. I saw the last name on the list, the coach who had the last interview of the day, and I recognized it from the research I did on that school in preparation for my interview. In fact, it was the only name I recognized on that list of other candidates. And guess what? I knew that he was a coordinator at that school. He was on staff there. He was a coordinator. He had the last interview. So I get it. Hiring from within. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. Just don't waste my time, right? I mean, I get it if you want to hire from within, especially a lot of private schools do that, I think, more than public. I don't know. Maybe not true anymore. But I totally get it. Don't have a sham interview, right? So sure enough, that guy got the job. I knew he would as soon as I saw his name on that list, and especially in that last position. Another head football interview I had that spring was at a school I really wanted to be at, a school I knew had underachieved for a long time. When I signed in at the front office, I looked at the names of the people who signed in before me and where they went. A little trick, as I talked about, for you to do in order to see if you can figure out what your competition will be. Sure enough, I saw 2 names of people on there who had been to the human resources. So when I say where they went, this was a main office you sign in, and then you sign in who you're going to visit. And so they had these 2 different names on there going to HR. And so as I sat there, okay, because they'd both been to HR in the last 3 hours. They didn't have all the interviews set up in a row. So I sat down and I Googled those names when I sat down and found they were local football coaches, both of them. One had been fired from his head football job a few months prior to that interview date and lived very close. So I did some research on him while I waited for my interview right there on my phone in the waiting room. And I found a great piece about him to bring up in a sly way during my interview. Listen to that. Check this out. Of course, I didn't use his name. I knew I had a good shot at that job based on the other 2 applicants. I lost that job in a really bizarre way. I'll tell that story here. But like I was saying, I found a pretty damaging piece of damaging article about one of those guys. And I don't want to talk about it too much here because, I just don't. I got people who listen to this from Southern California and don't want to get into that really. But I did kind of bring that up in my interview. And without using his name, I definitely threw that coach under the bus. I'll be honest with you. So anyway, I lost that job in a weird way. Check this out. I'm on vacation, right? I'm out in Las Vegas, my wife and I. And I get a call, and I knew like I'd be hearing back from these guys pretty soon, but they were taking forever, right? Well, I'm in Vegas, and this athletic director calls, okay? And this is at the, I'll tell you where it was, California Military Institute in Paris. No, that guy's not there anymore, the AD or the principal, and this is a long time ago, 8 years ago now. But they're like, hey, and I really thought I thought it was a great job. It was a great job on campus. It was a good paying job. We had lived in Paris before. This is Paris, California, not Paris, France. And I thought the football program would be able to do real well, right? So I really wanted this gig. Well, I'm out in Vegas for a quick little 4-day trip, right? And I get a call on day 2, and this AD is like, hey, Chris, we want to have a second round of interviews with you, but we need you out here tomorrow. And I'm like, can we do the interview in 2 days? I'm out in Vegas. I'm out of town. I told you guys I'd be out of town. Can we do it in a couple of days? He's like, you know what? That doesn't sound too bad. Yeah, Chris, we're real interested in you. We loved our first time together. You've done some great stuff. At schools, this division, the division really well, and we really wanted to get you back in here. So I said, yeah, I can't come, tomorrow. But, that was just going to ruin our little getaway. So I thought, these guys aren't, they weren't in a real hurry to hire a guy, I thought. So anyway, I'm sitting there with my phone all day. We're sitting by the pool, what have you. And I just keep looking at it, waiting for this guy to call. And then he might be listening. He's a head coach now. I don't know. He listens, man. That'd be funny. Send me a message, coach. You remember this. So the AD was set like, he was kind of totally in the middle. I don't feel bad about it. I don't feel bad. I'm sorry. I didn't blame him. I didn't blame him at all. Felt bad for him. Didn't blame him. But I'm sitting around waiting all day, right? This is on Tuesday. Waiting for this phone call, schedule an interview. I'm real excited. And he doesn't call me all Tuesday. And he calls me Wednesday morning at like 9 o'clock. He's like, hey, man, I got to tell you something. Like, we're doing interviews today. So we need you to be here today. I know you're in Vegas. It's 9 now. I put yours last. You got to be here by 4 o'clock today or we can't hire you. I'm like, now, dude, listen. Now, this is only about 4 or 5 hours from Vegas to this school, maybe. Yeah, probably 4 hours, maybe 5. But it's like, this is, we're here for 4 days, bro. And now I got to get up and leave. I don't have my suit with me. I got one suit, man. I'm a football coach and a teacher. I don't have a bunch of suits. I got a suit jacket too, I don't have nothing with me. I don't want to go buy a new outfit. And so I'm like, you know what, coach, if that's how you guys are going to hire this thing, just drop me out of it. I'm out, And I knew they really wanted to interview me again, but he was like, oh, Chris, I'm going to tell the principal, but I know he really likes you, and there's no way you can be down here today. I'm like, no, bro, I'm not coming down there today. I'm sorry. I don't want the job that bad. that's just weird, man. That's just not considered. That's what my whole deal was. I'm like, yeah, some guys are gonna say, oh, you should have just gone, dropped your vacation. You're only out there for 4 days anyway. There's some guys gone through a lot more than that. I don't know. The whole thing just didn't sit well with me. Like I said, the day before, I asked him to call me back today. We'll set it up. I even told him, if I have to drive down there, dude, before my vacation's over, I'll jet down there real quick and I'll jet back. But I just need to know today, to plan it. And then never heard from him that day. So that's why I was really just kind of miffed about it. But anyway, that was an interesting way to lose a job. Okay, so another way to find out who your competition is through message boards. Who is, get on message boards. You probably, if you're a serious coach, you probably don't get on message boards too much to read about your own football, your own sport. But find the message boards for that area you're going to interview in. See who people are saying are going to interview. A lot of funny, sometimes very good insight comes from message boards. So, that's another way to kind of see who your competition is. Again, this might help you understand if the interview is a sham or not. Obviously, message board hounds usually don't have a clue what's going on, but sometimes they do. I believe where there's smoke, there's fire. I went on an interview at a high-profile Southern California private school job years ago. In fact, I was kind of surprised I got an interview, to be completely honest. I'll say it, St. Paul. This was right after, God bless his soul, right after Coach Ansich had left. But later on, I realized, it's a sham interview. A few days before that interview, I saw some discussion pop up on a message board about the school hiring a certain coach, high-profile coach back then. I won't say his name, but he had the old saying at St. Paul, he wasn't there long, maybe half a season. I think ultimately was fired for leaving a kid, didn't get on the bus. I don't recruit, I attract. If you remember that famous quote here in Southern California. But anyway, it was a privilege to get the interview there. I was pretty stoked to get that call for an interview. And then, like I said, I realized I read these messages. It's a done deal. He's already signed, and I'm like, I don't know. But I was discouraged. I'm not going to lie. I was discouraged. There were multiple people talking about the fact they knew this was a done deal for a little while. A few who I knew were close to the program. But I went anyway for two reasons. One, it's a bulletin board. It's not the gospel, right? And then two, it's a high-profile school, St. Paul, tremendous school, football school for a long, long time here in SoCal. I thought it'd be good for me to press my flesh with people in that room. You never know what might come of it down the road. In fact, an administrator in that room asked me more questions about my AD experience than my head football experience, and actually asked if I'd be interested in their AD job. So I thought that was an interesting part of that interview. Sure enough, a few weeks later, that coach who was rumored to be the guy was the guy. And then he wasn't the guy. As I said, he was fired halfway through that season. So one final very easy way to tell if you're sitting in a sham interview, they aren't listening to you. There were 5 people on an interview panel I had at that place where I said they interviewed 10 of us in one day. Two of those people never looked up from the interview forms or my portfolio or their phone. 2 out of 5 people on their phone the entire interview. That tells me they knew they were wasting their time as well. In fact, I received an email the very next day saying, "Thank you for coming in for an interview." I thought, yeah, that's a sham interview if I've ever seen one. Nobody, 2 people not even listening, not even paying attention. That's pretty much a joke. So, anyhow, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast about sham interviews. Appreciate it. Remember, go to 8laces.org, EIGHTLACES.org. Get that book, An Insider's Guide to Scoring Your Next Coaching Job. If you put in during the year 2019, if you put in the coupon code podcast when you go to checkout, you put in podcast, you'll save $10 on that, and you'll get it for $9.94. Folks, check out footballcoachingpodcast.com. Now that the season's all done, I see a lot of guys mentioning, hey, what are some good podcasts? Footballcoachingpodcast.com has a whole slew of podcasts. A guy by the name of Joe Daniel, who got me into this podcasting world, so to speak. Okay. And footballcoachingpodcast.com has a whole slew of some really good football coaches. There's a podcast called the JDFB Quick Clinic. That's the Joe Daniel Football Quick Clinic. I like those. They're 20-minute podcasts right around that. You've got a podcast called the Pro Style Spread Offense by Jason Hanstatt. It is what it is. Pro Style Spread Offense. He does a great job there. You've got one called Talking Football with Coach McKee. That's another great one. Okay, and then, of course, the Taj Mahal of football coaching podcasts, the Football Coaching Podcast. That's what it's called. That's hosted by Joe Daniel. Joe has been running football podcasts longer than anybody alive and does a phenomenal job. He's on season 4 of podcasting, but that's I don't know when he started numbering them, because I think he had like 200 episodes or something in season 1. I don't know. But I was on with him back in like 2012 doing a pod. I don't think I've ever heard of a podcast, honestly. And so anyway, check out Football Coaching Podcast. There's some really, really great ones on there. I just gave you info on 5 different podcasts all in one place, footballcoachingpodcast.com. You can reach me on Twitter at Coach Fore. My email, Chris, CHRIS, Chris at 8laces, EIGHTLACES.org. And, until next time, thanks for checking out Coach's Locker Podcast with Chris Fore.